Everybody, it's Anthony Brogdon, and boy, oh boy, I'm so excited to have the lady on the show today. You're gonna hear a story that is gonna blow your mind. And let me tell you how excited I am. She got people. I was contacted through her people. I gotta get me some people so my people can talk to her people, but I don't care. I am excited. This lady, ooh, she is well thought of in her circles nationally and probably ever even internationally. You'll hear the story. I'm Anthony Brogdon, and I'm the host of Strong Inspirations, where I give it to you straight, no chaser, to intoxicate your mind through the guests who come on here, for them to share their stories of various forms, mostly Black history, but there is wellness involved in this. All right. You might have seen some of the videos of the how to eat healthy and mental stuff. I'm bringing more of that in 2025. And so, everybody, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button on Strong Inspiration. It's free. This is free Black history. This is my contribution to civilization. Yes, to let you know some of these stories. How about that? And I enjoy doing it. I'm a better person since Strong Inspiration. I'm gonna be a better person after hearing this sister's conversation. And I do my best to ask some intelligent questions. Hit the like button because there is no love button. You're gonna love this, I promise. Hit the notifications bell so you get a ding, a shock to know that there is new content on Strong Inspirations. Do that and then tell somebody. Don't be running around here and telling all these stories like what Frederick Douglass. I got his great grandson on the show, and he tells the story that Frederick Douglass's son and Booker T. Washington's daughter got married. I did not know that, or that I got Madam C.J. Walker's granddaughter on the show. She says Madam Walker only operated her company for about 13 years. She was older when she started, and she died at like 51. So she did all that in those years. Did you see the one I did with the guy who goes to Egypt and goes into the pyramids, and he tells what you see and what to expect? Watch that one. Or and they get a little deeper in some respects. So how about the one where the guy's grandfather almost got lynched, and the guy in the robe let him go? Watch that one. Or the guy who he spied on a KKK rally and got caught. Watch that one. And there's so many more. I mean, how did Harlem become Harlem for Black people? I got a guy on the show that tells that story because it was actually for white people. They were kind of moving away from the Midtown area, and Harlem had those big, beautiful apartment buildings, and it was for white people. But they had a downturn in the economy. Watch that one so to understand the whole story behind Harlem. And I don't have any copies of my book, everybody. I just come off the road and sold every one that I had. So you all know about Black Business Book, America's #1 Black business history book. That's me. You know about my children's book, They Did It, 30 Rich Black People in the 1800s. You know about my documentary, Business in the Black.net. I mean, my documentary, Business in the Black. It's on Amazon, and I just gave you a clue. My website is businessintheblack.net. Now, check it out, everybody. Y'all hear me use this term strong a lot. Strong is my favorite word, which my middle name was Strong. And in my world, strong stands for strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace. And that is my introduction to the strong sister, one of them PhD type people. Everybody on my show today, come on, introduce yourself. Let's get it on.
Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here. I always love being in conversation with people who understand the importance of Black history. And so I welcome the opportunity to engage with all of you. I'm very thankful for this opportunity to be here. My name is Crystal Sanders. I'm originally from Clayton, North Carolina. I now live in Atlanta, Georgia, where I teach at Emory University. I teach African American Studies. All of my courses are I teach most of the history courses in the department. So I teach courses on the civil rights movement, courses on Black women's history, courses on Black educational history, and courses on African American life in the United States in the 20th century. So I
Okay.
am looking forward to our conversation today, talking about Black aspiration and Black resilience
All right.
during the period of legal segregation.
I love it. And so before we get into that, I got to ask a couple questions. And you kind of alluded, where were you born and raised again?
I was born in Raleigh, North Carolina, and raised in the Raleigh area in a small town right outside of Raleigh called Clayton, North Carolina.
Clayton, North Carolina. Now, is that predominantly black, white? What's the
It's
dynamic?
predominantly white. It's a rural community right outside of Raleigh. And my family had been enslaved there and continued to live there after emancipation. And we've always had our family roots there. My parents are still there.
Hold on, enslaved. So on the plantation in that town,
Yes, yes. In
did
really in that county. So my family was enslaved in Smithfield, which was a town that neighbors Clayton. And so my grandparents, my great grandparents, they all lived in Smithfield. But when my dad came of age, he moved to the next town over, which is Clayton. And so that's where I was raised.
okay? How about this? How that make you feel to be that close to the devastation that could have happened, or and you
Well,
know the devastational stories? Yeah, to know that. Yeah, how does that feel?
Well, I feel very blessed that I grew up in a family that number one taught us our history, and number two taught us all of the ways in which my family resisted all of the implications of white supremacy. And so during Reconstruction, my great great grandfather bought a lot of the land where he had once been enslaved. And that was just one of the numerous ways that, my family members have taught me about my past and have taught us all of the ways in which family members challenged white supremacy in whichever ways they could, that they fought back, that they resisted, that they never subscribed to any notions of Black inferiority. And so I've never, I've always held up my head high and always said, despite every obstacle that white people in this community have tried to use to stymie my potential and the potential of my relatives, we have always found a way to reach, our goals and always found a way to fight back against white supremacy.
Okay, I want to stay on this because that's interesting stuff. Okay, who was the enslaver? Do you know their name, right?
I do. And so what's interesting, the enslaver, the family, I believe is I want to say the first name was Edmund, but the last name is Sanders. That's where my surname comes from. And this particular man had actually been a politician in the North Carolina General Assembly. So he was not only a slave owner, but he was someone who made lots of laws in the 19th century for he was a member of the legislature that was making lots of laws influencing life for white and Black people. And I love telling my students that because I want them to understand that, slave owners were not just engaged in human trafficking, but these were people who were elected officials, people who were supposedly, the leaders of communities in this antebellum period. And so
Yeah.
I like to use my own family's history to really help students understand this isn't something that happened 500 years ago that we
Yeah,
can't
sure.
understand and point to, but this
Sure.
is still relatively new history. And in the
Yeah.
same way that my family grew up in Johnston County and Clayton and Smithfield, these rural towns where my family has always lived, they lived very close to the very people who considered them property. But my
Mhm.
parents and my grandparents and my great grandparents never subscribed, right, to this idea of Black inferiority. So even, in the years after emancipation for my great great grandparents, they never once thought that because they had been enslaved, that they could not yet enjoy, the benefits of freedom and to pass on this idea of Black aspiration and the importance of Black education and the importance of family to their
Let me let,
descendants. And
let
that's
me let me
exactly what they've done.
let me ask you this: was he a nice guy, the enslaver, or was
I
he
mean,
brutal? Do you know?
first I would, we qualify that question. I mean, can there
Right.
be a nice slave owner, right?
Right. Right.
That's an oxymoron.
Right.
I will say that one of my great great grandfathers was interviewed by a local white newspaper in about 1900, 1903, and he talked about being on the auction block. So we do know that he was sold from within the same family, sold to different men within the family. So we do know that, I mean, slave owners had no qualms about breaking up Black families.
Yeah,
I know
yeah,
that if
yeah.
I take the Sanders side of my family, I can go back to my great 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 grandfather, whose name was Richmond Sanders, and he had a common law marriage to a woman named Charlotte Tomlinson, and Charlotte and Richmond lived on different plantations. So we know that slave owners had no reservations at all about splitting up families.
Okay,
But in that same newspaper interview that my great great grandfather Wesley Bell gave, he also talked about witnessing loved ones being whipped. So, I don't really,
okay, okay.
we could, there are degrees of meanness
Yeah, I
perhaps,
got
but
you.
we're
Yeah,
not
yeah, sure. Yeah,
necessarily going to
yeah.
talk about any benevolent slave owners,
Right, right.
because if they
Let
were
me.
so benevolent, they wouldn't have been trafficking in
Yeah.
human beings.
What was he a farmer, or what was his business as a plantation owner?
So the White Sanders family were tobacco farmers.
Oh,
So they
tobacco.
had
Okay,
large tobacco plantations. And after emancipation, several of my ancestors became tobacco farmers.
okay. I mean, you alluded to earlier that he actually bought the land. How was he able, first of all, maybe to get the money to do it, and then how did they agree to sell him the land? I've always wondered that.
When we look at, so I've looked at deeds of trust, and in about 1890, Hardy Sanders is my great great grandfather, was able to amass somewhere around 80 acres, 85 acres of land. And from what I've been told, he was able to get this land by buying it buying it in different parcels, and typically, as he made money from developing the land, from selling tobacco, he would then buy
Oh,
additional tracts that were
okay,
adjoining to the property that he had. So he
okay,
amasses this land over time. He is buried on that land today. My great great grandmother is buried on that land, and then my great grandparents are also buried on that land. After that, um, relatives like my grandparents started being buried in the town cemetery versus on this family property, but the family has maintained the property. So now that land has been in the family for over 100 years.
oh, okay. That's interesting. So he became a tobacco farmer himself.
Yes, yes.
Um,
And he was
I,
also a pastor. He pastored several Black Baptist
oh,
churches.
is that right? Okay. I got to ask this, and because I try to keep it real, he had to hire other black people, black and white people, to help cultivate the tobacco. Correct?
I would assume so. I should say, Hardy Sanders has, you know, most Black farming families were quite large back in the day. And so he had 10 or 11 children who were going
Oh,
to be
that's
helping him on
okay.
the
Yes,
land.
yes,
Even when I
yes,
think about my mother's family, my
yes,
mother is the youngest of 14 kids. My
yes,
maternal grandfather was a tobacco farmer. And he
yes,
would say, well, I didn't have to hire that many people because I have 14 kids.
yes,
My mother
yes,
and all of her siblings worked land.
yes.
So, they
Okay.
had in-house labor.
I got to ask this one too. Is there any trauma in the family back then? If you do want to tell or not, did somebody get lynched, or did he get burned out, or the white people get mad at him? Any of those kind of things?
Well, I thankfully, when I look at my family's history on both sides, I haven't found evidence of racial violence. But there are other forms of trauma. I mean, on my mother's side of the family, there was land that was stolen. My grandfather was not a, my excuse me, my great grandfather was not a literate man, and he paid his tax bills in cash. And even though these are tax bills that he paid, the person he paid then went and gave an affidavit that he had not been paid, and there was land that was taken from my family. I could say
Hmm.
that that is a story that has been passed down from generation to generation to emphasize the importance of getting receipts, to emphasize the importance of getting an education, so that you don't just have to have your mark on a deed or on a receipt, but that you could actually write legibly your name. So
Right,
those
right.
are so that I could say that's a form of trauma because that was stolen wealth. And I can tell you that this is a story that my mother has constantly, talked about with my sister and I, and reminded us that there's land that we could pass that's nearby where my grandparents' house is. And this is land that should have belonged to our family, that now belongs to a prominent white family in the county. So um, we tend to think about kind of the most obvious forms of racial violence and trauma with respect to kind of lynchings.
Yeah,
And,
sure.
there's all forms of trauma if we think about in this Jim Crow era where white people are using or deploying all types of schemes to steal the wealth of African Americans and to instill fear in African Americans. So there
Yeah.
are stories of the Klan burning crosses on a couple of my cousins' yards, and
Oh, really?
this is in the
Oh,
1950s.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
this isn't even in the Reconstruction period or the early 20th century.
yeah. So, 80 acres is a lot of land, I would suspect. That, I mean, if we could equate that, that's got to be, what, 5 city blocks or something like that? Or is it, what would you think, maybe?
I don't
Yeah,
know what it
yeah,
would
yeah, yeah,
amount to,
yeah.
but it was a significant land holding. The land was ended up to being divided among his children, his heirs, and several, there were a couple of children who sold their portions. But there is the land where he was buried, where his tombstone still is, where the tombstone of his wife is. No, that land has never been sold. And
Okay,
typically for
okay.
the family reunion, our family reunion now travels around the country, but whenever the family reunion is in Smithfield, everyone is taken back to the home place.
Yeah,
Everyone goes to visit, the land that still remains in the family to see the tombstones and to learn
yes.
about the patriarchs of our family.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay
Patriarchs
on this
and
just a little bit more.
patriarchs.
We're gonna get to the other side of the story.
Sure.
Now, is there a family house that was the house they lived in, or anything like that, or a tree that said that was their tree, their name is carved in, any of those kind of remnants?
On my mother's side of the family, there is a family house. My great grandparents' house is still standing, and
Wow.
that house is still in the family. On my father's side, where I talk about the Sanders land, this 80 acres, there is not a house that is still standing. I can tell you, however, that the land, remember I told you that he bought part of the land where he had been enslaved.
Yes.
The big house, the house where the people who owned him
Yes.
stayed, that house is still standing. And not only is it still standing, but today the current owners rent it out as a wedding venue. People hold their weddings there. It's not
Yes.
it won't remind you of the grand palaces, the grand plantation homes and of a place like New Orleans, Louisiana, but this was a
Yeah.
nice house for rural North Carolina. And it
Yeah.
is, less than I would say 2 miles from where my great um, grandfather is buried. And it was
Yes.
only recently, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, that we found out that that had been the big house for the Sanders plantation. I never knew that until we were preparing for a family reunion. And a couple of us had gone over to the Johnson County Heritage Center, which is a kind of like a museum and
Yeah.
a keeper of records of both Black and white residents of the county. And I happened to be talking to the director of the Heritage Center and telling him about the family reunion and what we planned to do. And he knew my family. And he was the one who says, I don't know if you know the connection to this home that's,
Yeah.
in close proximity to your
Yes.
family cemetery, but this
Yes.
was the big house for the Sanders family that owned your family.
Let, let,
And so that
let me
was
ask you
very
this.
eye-opening
Would
for us
you
to
want
learn
to,
that.
have you met, or would you want to meet the the children of the enslaver?
I have never met them. Most of that family has moved away or died out, but I'm sure with proper digging, we could find a descendant or two. But I
Yeah.
have never tried. If I did meet them, I would say, are you interested in discussing
Yes.
all of the
Yes.
wealth that your family accrued from ownership of my family? But I've never once tried
Well,
to
that would be what
locate
you want to
any
say.
descendants. I mean, let's call
Okay.
a spade, and
Yeah, 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 right.
we can
Yeah,
talk about all of this uncompensated labor, right?
yeah,
That
yeah, yeah,
generations
yeah,
of
yeah.
Black people performed to make the United States what it is today.
Yeah. Okay. How about this one? And again, in my keeping it real, was he ever? Did he bore any children from any of your ancestors? May I ask that?
No, I don't have any evidence of that. And when I
Oh,
think about my
really?
family phenotypically, I have not, I'm not, I don't suspect that.
Oh, really? Okay, okay. And so, was that something that? How did you become who you are? Was that something that people had that was in the family that he did that he liked Black history, or did you like to play an instrument, or you smoke tobacco, or anything like that that could have been passed down because of your great grandparents?
Well, first I'll say that family has always been prioritized in my family. From a young age, I was told, you are a Sanders. You need to know who your people are. You need to
Okay,
hold your head up high and you need to understand what it means to be a Sanders. I was literally taught that by my great uncles who essentially said, faith, education, and family. Those are the things you are going to pursue. Those are
yes,
the things that we pursued. And
yes,
that's what we want you to instill to your children one day. And so
yes,
every year, every August, the Sanders family comes together. That's been done since 1970. There's only
wow,
been a 2 year break in that coming together annually, and that 2 year break was during the pandemic. But I can
yes,
tell you that that was something that was instilled in me from a young age, that I was supposed to know my family's history, that I was supposed to understand, given that history, what I should do as a student, what I should do as
yes,
a child.
yes. I love it.
That was passed down to me at an early age. Now that
I
I'm a
love it.
parent, I pass
Yes,
that down to my kids.
I
It's
love it.
imperative that my children go to the family reunion every year.
Yes,
That's something that my husband knows is really important to me.
yes,
I am hopeful that my children will one day understand the same priorities that have been passed down to me are going to be expected of them. And I
yes,
hope that 50 years from now, my children are ensuring that their children and
yes. I love it.
grandchildren
I
are
love it.
also attending the family reunion and getting to know our family history. So I should tell you that at every family reunion, the history is read. And, sometimes people may say, why do we read the same history year after year? But it's to ensure, right, that no one forgets where we've come from. And it's to ensure that if 100 years ago, right, our ancestors were pulling together nickels and dimes to ensure that that there was a home place, to ensure that my grandparents could go to school, that we have no excuse today. And
Okay,
so my great uncle, who actually just passed away, 97 years old, and his funeral will be February 15th, he would get up and say, we have no excuse. There's no reason that anyone in this room should not be pursuing education because it wasn't always possible for us to complete high school. So now you
yes,
have nothing, you don't have any excuse. You don't have
right.
to go work.
Sure.
You don't have your school doesn't end in the eighth grade. And so those types of messages are constantly reinforced at the
Yes.
family reunion to ensure
I
that
love it.
the younger generations kind of understand, where we've been, and they have a better understanding of why there are such demands being made of or asked of them today.
A couple more on that before we get because I'm loving this so much, and I think people will like the story. What in the town that you grew up was it was all white. How did that do for you with all
Well,
this
I shouldn't, it wasn't all,
pride
it
in
was
black people?
majority
What?
white. So the town was, I mean, the county, I would say, is probably 75% white, 25% black.
Mhm.
What I must say is that the county had a very strong, vibrant, and active Black community. So there were
Oh,
Black
okay,
churches, there were
okay,
Black Masonic lodges, and other civic groups who really rallied, who showed up at school board meetings, who were going to demand that the school board begin to hire Black principals. Was what was often the case across the South when desegregation finally comes in the late 1960s to public schools throughout the South, but especially in North Carolina. It was all too common that Black principals would be fired and replaced with white principals. And this was true in my county. And so
mm,
by the 1980s, we could say that's 30 years after the Brown decision, but really 20 years after implementation of Brown, it would be these Black preachers and Black club women going to school board meetings and having meetings at Black churches before the school board meeting, saying, we're going to get our agenda straight. We're
I
going to
love
speak with
it.
one voice. We are going to ensure that we go into that meeting knowing what it is that we want and making it clear that there will be consequences if these requests and demands are not at least heard with the sincerity in which these requests are being made.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, I mean, so when I think about it being a majority white community, yes, there were countless examples of racism. And my county was known to be a haven for the Ku Klux Klan.
Is that
That did
right?
not stop Black people from organizing. That didn't stop Black people from showing up.
I
That
gotta
didn't
ask you a
stop.
personal question then. Were you ever called the N word?
I don't recall being called the N word to my face, but I'm very confident that perhaps it was called, that word was used um, with respect to me behind my back. But I never recall it happening to being called that to my face.
Okay, in grade school, because I suspect, and I'm sure I'm taking good living, you got good grades. Did they ever do anything so that you couldn't be the class valedictorian or
It was interesting
recognized
that
for
you say
your?
this. I was the class valedictorian,
Okay.
and only the second Black valedictorian in my high school's history,
Oh man, I
with the
love
first
it.
Black valedictorian being my sister, who was 2 years older than me. And I will say that there were teachers who tried their best to ensure that I would not receive the grades that I had earned to become valedictorian. I can tell you that there was a policy of the valedictorian receiving a special medal to wear at graduation. The year that I was valedictorian, the principal told the company who always gave the medal to the school for free that he didn't want a medal that year. My
Wow.
parents were outraged. My parents then call the company themselves and say, "We don't care what the principal said. Our daughter has earned this medal. Let us know if we need to go pick up the medal or if you're going to mail it to us." And then my parents called the school and essentially said to the principal and the guidance counselor, "How dare you deny my daughter of the
Oh, I
honor
love
of
it.
wearing such a medal, given the fact that she has earned, you know, this recognition." Now, in terms of being called by the N word, my father was called that on several occasions. My
Oh
father
really?
in 1983 became the first African American elected to the town council in our town. And I can tell you that he serves from 83 to 91, and there would not be another African American elected to the town council until 2019. So that just tells you all about
Right.
race in my area,
Yeah,
even though
yeah,
lots
yeah,
of
yeah.
African Americans had run. And I can tell you there were times in council meetings where my father's fellow white councilmen would use the N word and they would catch themselves. And my father would have to go off and demand an apology and demand that that would be taken out of the minutes for the meeting. So, I mean, this was not, there was hostility.
Yeah,
But
okay, I got you.
despite that hostility, African Americans showed up. African Americans made demands. African Americans were not going to be scared into silence.
All right,
And so
that
there's
answers
lots
this
of
question.
stories like that.
What growing up, what was your take on white people? Well, and I know you had all this black pride, so this is gonna be an easy one. But did at some point did you say they got it better than us? I mean, they got because y'all lived on one side of the tracks. Is that kind of the situation? And what was that? What I'm asking a bunch of questions. Let me get it straight. First of all, this is the easy one. What was the town, the neighborhood called that you grew up in on your side of the tracks, and what was the other one called?
Oh, okay. So first, I love this question because I grew up in an all-Black neighborhood that was called Rollingwood. That was the name of the neighborhood. And I grew up in a neighborhood that was diverse in terms of socioeconomic classes. So there were
Okay.
medical doctors, Black medical doctors in my neighborhood. There was one of the only Black attorneys in the whole county lived in my neighborhood. There were public school teachers. There were factory workers. There were state government workers. So it was a beautiful neighborhood of Black families committed to ensuring that Black children could reach their highest potential.
Right.
So I didn't grow up with any sense of inferiority. I didn't grow up with any sense that white people were better than us or that the ice was colder on the
Yeah,
white
yeah,
side of
yeah.
town. I grew up in a very strong knit, all Black community that basically every single one of us was told we could be whatever we wanted to be.
What was the
They
street
had
that
told
everybody hung out on?
Well, so my Rollingwood only had three streets. So it's it was long streets. These were very long streets, but it was a neighborhood with three streets, and there's only one way in and one way out of this neighborhood. I grew up on, the middle street. But we still talk today about um, just how special our neighborhood was. I can tell you that the current president of the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, a sharp Black woman by the name of Dr. Valerie Ashby. She lived right across the street from me. So
Oh, I
I mean
love
that,
that.
we love to say that everyone in this neighborhood, everyone didn't go to college. Some people went into the military. Some people went straight into the workforce, but they all became productive citizens. And that was in part because we had a community telling us that that was our portion, that was our lot, and that we should never feel inferior to anyone else.
I
And
gotta
so,
go. I
I
got.
I will always love that neighborhood. So sometimes on social media, when I see one of my childhood friends or someone who grew up in the neighborhood, we'll say Rolling Wood forever, and that
Yeah.
essentially is just a nod to the community that we had growing up. And it
I
was
got. I
such
got
a special community. But
oh,
yes, I love talking about my neighborhood. So
cool.
thank you
Cool.
for that question.
Yeah. Yeah.
It will
Cool. Okay.
always have a near and dear place to my heart.
With that said, how did you become wanted to be a professor and then teach Black history? Yeah. Why Black history of you know?
So I grew up in a home where Black history was taught to me every single day of my life growing up. It could be as simple as my father telling me the history of our church or telling me the history of something unique or extraordinary that our next door neighbor had done. My father was a history major himself when he went to college. And he, being a lover of history, used every opportunity he could to introduce, historical facts to my sister and I. And so, growing up, I remember watching the Eyes on the Prize series when it used to come on every February, I believe. It used to come on every February on PBS. It would take about a week for them to show the entire series. And my father, every single year, made my sister and I sit down and watch it. And he not only made us watch it, but he made us watch it on a little small 13-inch black and white television that had been his television when he was in college. I don't know why we couldn't watch it on our regular TV. But that made it even extra special, I guess, that I
Okay.
was
Sure.
watching
Sure.
it in black and white on the smallest of televisions. But I recall sitting there with him and watching that year after year. And it kind of instilled in me this idea that Black people have been organizing and mobilizing and fighting for full freedom for a very long time. And I would witness my father through organizations that he was a part of, also continuing to fight and organize and speak up for what was right. When I told you that he was a member of the city council, even after the state of North Carolina had formally adopted the King holiday as a state holiday, my town did not want to adopt it as a holiday for town employees. And year after year, my father would introduce a motion for the town of Clayton to adopt the King holiday. And year after year, it would be voted down. He was the only Black person on the council. And so one year, my father got smart and he made a motion that the town of Clayton would adopt the same holiday schedule as the state of North Carolina. And his fellow councilmen, didn't think that could be harmful. And so they immediately all
Oh, I
supported
got
the
that was
motion.
smooth move.
And
Yeah.
after they supported it, though,
Yeah.
one of the councilmen said, "Wait, did I just vote for the King holiday?" And my dad
Yes.
looked at him with a smirk and says, "You most certainly did." But it
Yes.
tells you the ways in which, Black people have always had to be strategic, right?
Yes.
About sometimes getting things that should be basic.
Yes.
Because why are they so opposed to the King holiday when it's already been adopted at this point, the federal level and the state level? But the town of
Right.
Clayton, a little small rural town, doesn't want
Yes.
to adopt it. And he has to
Yes.
have this backroom maneuvering to get it to finally be recognized by the town and a day that town employees would be off.
Okay. I just want people to get to know you right quick. You went to what undergrad? What? And you got your doctorate,
Yes,
right?
sir.
What
Yes.
did you get your doctorate at? Just in case.
So I attended Duke University for
Ooh,
undergrad, where I
ooh,
majored in history and public policy. I was
ooh,
very blessed. Duke gave me a scholarship, so that
ooh.
made attending that institution financially feasible for me.
Yes.
Before getting that scholarship, which was a full ride, I was on my way to Spelman College. So that's
Okay.
how I ended up not going to Spelman,
Okay.
solely because of finances. And then for graduate study, I attended Northwestern University, where I got my PhD in history.
That's Chicago.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay. Let me ask you this. You do you get tired of talking Black history? And I ask in this regard, Black history in many instances has a traumatic feel to it. Not all, but I mean it's about the beatdown in broad terms, I would say. Now there's those individual stories of successful Black people, but most of Black history is what they did to us. Is that correct? And is that do you get tired of saying what they did to us, to hurt us, to harm us?
Well, I don't see Black history as the history of what has been done to us. I see Black history as a history of how we have overcome odds that have been, would be insurmountable for other people,
I
right?
love
So
it. I
it's a
love it.
history of resiliency.
Right.
And now the question could be, should we always have to be resilient? Can't we just live?
Right.
Um, but I do understand that there are those who sometimes say, this is a history that's so heavy and full of trauma and full of
Yes.
violence that it's
Yes.
not a history that I want to hear. And I
Yes.
oftentimes would say, well, unfortunately, someone must have been teaching it to you incorrectly because I see it as a history of African Americans from all walks of life, right? Using all kinds of resources, all types of ingenuity to respond and overcome every single challenge that has been placed in front of them.
Yes. I
And so
love it.
whether we're talking about enslaved people being fed the worst parts of the pig, right? And coming up with culinary dishes that now people are paying crazy amounts of money
I
for,
love it.
or it's creating our own sense of style because
Yes.
we were always given the rags,
Yes. I
or
love it.
creating our own sense of walking when perhaps we had to create this lean and this type of carrying our feet because half the time we didn't have shoes, or we didn't have shoes with a complete sole on the bottom, right?
I
So I
love it.
see it as all of the ways that we have been really given lemons. And we
Yeah.
didn't just make lemonade, but
Yes.
we made all kinds of dishes out of these
There you
lemons,
go. I
right?
love
And
it.
so it's a story of resiliency, and it's a story of aspiration, and a story of resistance, and
Yes.
we could even call it a story of Black joy, because in the
Yes.
midst of all of these, um, in the midst of all of these trials, where we see our citizenship rights and our very humanity being questioned, we still found ways to love, still found ways
Yes.
to laugh,
I
right?
love it.
And so I don't see Black history as just a history of trauma, but I really
Yes.
see it as a history of Black people overcoming odds
Yes.
that, I don't know of any other group of people that perhaps could achieve what has been achieved given all
I
of the
love
barriers
it.
that have been placed in.
Which leads to this: is there, and you sure already said it? Is there a ha ha moment for you in Black history? Is there one that the like that? Ooh, you read a book, or I know you other than what your parents told you, but something else outside that, maybe even in the classroom, where you said, "Ha ha, this is gonna be my path."
I mean, I have always been struck by Black people's relationship to education. I've been struck by that because when you look at Southern state laws prior to emancipation, you see that these were anti-literacy laws, meaning there were laws on the books in every Southern state making it illegal to teach Black people to read and write. These laws typically would suggest that, or these laws stipulated that if a Black person learned to read and write, they were to be punished with 39 lashes, right? That's bringing them almost to the point of death if we think of Roman law and the 40 lashes that happened
Hmm.
at the crucifixion. And so, despite that danger, we see Black people during slavery trying to become literate. They're willing to risk it all to learn to read and write. And then when we look at after emancipation, some of the first things that Black people do, other than reunite their families and try to legalize their marriages, are to start schools. because they understood the power of literacy and they understood that education would be a vehicle to prevent slavery from ever happening again.
I love
And
it.
so that continues, right? We see that when during, when we get to this age of Jim Crow and Black schools aren't funded adequately, we see poor Black people pulling their meager resources and saying, we're going to make up the shortfall. If they won't give our schools uniforms, we're going to sew some uniforms. If they won't give our schools a bus, we're going to have cake sales and fish plate sales, and we're going to buy a bus.
Yeah, I
And so
love
we
it.
see all through history, right? African Americans rallying to create educational opportunities for Black children.
Let-
And we're still doing that. We're
We're still
still on
doing
the
it.
front lines of trying to ensure that our children get an accurate, inclusive account of American history,
Let me
right?
ask you this then. I don't mean it because I know the hour and your hour and stuff like that. What is there? Can you tell us a story about somebody that we don't know that you inspired you? That from your town, and again, not your parents, but from your town or somebody like that. You said that this is somebody that y'all should hear about this story.
Oh gosh, there are so many cases of that. I mean, oh gosh, there are numerous cases of Black women in particular in the South giving land for schools to be created in a place called Harmony, Mississippi. There would be a woman by the name of Winston Hudson, and she had a sister named Dovey, and no one knows these women's names, but these women um, and their families in the early 20th century say, we don't have much land, but we're going to take 1 acre of this land and we're going to start a school on this land to ensure that Black children have somewhere to go to learn to read and write. And they do this in the early 20th century, like 1920, maybe 1919. And that school they end up deeding the land over to the county for it to become a public school for African Americans in Harmony, Mississippi.
Mm,
Um, there are countless stories like this all
yeah,
across
yeah,
the South. In
yeah.
my county, there was no high school for African Americans, and it would be the Black Baptist pastors who say, we're going to all join forces and we're going to start a high school for Black people. It was called the Associational High School. That was the name of it because there was a public high school for white students, but there was no counterpart for Black students. And it would be Black churches coming
Mm,
together. And these Black churches didn't have but two or three nickels and dimes to rub together. But it was, the audacity to say we're going to fundraise and we're going to buy some land and we're going to build a school, and that's what they do, right? And
okay, okay,
that takes vision, that takes courage, and
okay.
that takes bravery in a South where white people are not just not committed to Black
Right,
education, but they
right.
are hostile to Black education. They are burning down Black schools. They are terrorizing anyone Black or white who tries to teach Black children. But in spite of those odds, in spite of those dangers, we're seeing Black people all over say, I refuse to be silenced. I refuse to be afraid. And I will do what I have to do to ensure that there is a schoolhouse for Black children. That's such a beautiful story
It
to me.
is,
And
yes.
that just shows how important education has always been to Black freedom struggles.
When I first found out about you, you had just recently released a new book. Is that the case? And tell us about the book. You got a picture of the book, and then let's promote the book,
Oh,
please.
sure. Let me grab a
Yes,
copy. So, my
yes,
new
yes.
book is called A Forgotten Migration: Black Southerners, Segregation Scholarships, and the Debt Owed to Public HBCUs. And I essentially wrote this book because I began to realize that large numbers of Black people were leaving the South for anything beyond the bachelor's degree. So, anytime they wanted a master's degree, a PhD, a JD degree, law school degree, or an MD, they were leaving the South and going to the North, Midwest, or West. And I was struck by this because I'm not talking a handful, I'm talking thousands upon thousands of Black Southerners doing this during the age of Jim Crow. And my first question, I remember asking this of my father, why'd they go so far away from home? Why in 1941 is a Black public school teacher going to NYU or Columbia to get a master's degree in education? because I'm from North Carolina. There was North Carolina College, which is present day North Carolina Central. There was North Carolina A&T. There was Elizabeth City. There was Fayetteville State, and there was Winston-Salem State. So I'm thinking, why they go so far away from home? And my father said to me, "Did you really think they had a choice?" And that question stayed with me. And what I learned was that while white residents of North Carolina could go to the University of North Carolina and pursue a master's degree or a PhD or MD or a JD, African Americans didn't have those same options. That Southern state governments had only made provision for Black Southerners to get bachelor's degrees at public Black colleges, but there was nothing beyond the bachelor's degree. And so, what Southern states did is they started compelling Black students to go out of state and saying, "We'll give you a few dollars to subsidize your education. And by giving you that money, we're going to say that we're in compliance with separate but equal." So that's what
Hmm.
I use the phrase segregation scholarships, because 16 Southern and border states would give African Americans a few dollars to use toward tuition and tell them, leave home. You can't go to UNC. You can't go to UGA if you're a Georgia native. You can't go to the University of Florida if you're a Florida native, but we'll give you a few dollars. And by giving you a few dollars, we're going to tell the Supreme Court that we have fulfilled our constitutional obligation of equal protection under the law.
They,
Well,
they they did that instead of saying we're going to make it where these schools would accept the students.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And not only did they do that to keep Black students out of these flagship institutions, but they could have invested in public Black colleges. So rather than send Black residents of Florida out of state for a master's degree or a PhD or an MD, they could have created a graduate school at FAMU. They could have created
Oh,
a graduate school
I
at
got
Kentucky
you. I
State.
got you.
They could have
Yes.
created a graduate school at the University of Arkansas Pine Bluff, but they did not. They used tax dollars to send Black students out of state. And here's the rub: most of the money they used to send Black students out of state, they took from the operating budgets of their public Black colleges. So this is a system of robbing Peter to pay Paul. So when a Black resident of Florida went out of state for graduate study because they could not study at the University of Florida, the state of Florida paid for that few dollars that they gave them by taking the money out of FAMU's budget. So this is literally a story of stealing money from Black colleges to preserve segregation.
Oh,
That's why I
yes.
say
That's
that there's a
exactly
debt
right. That's
owed.
exactly right. Yes.
When we think about these institutions today, there is a debt owed because number one, you can clearly go into the archives and see, and this is big money. I'm not talking small amounts of money. So in one year, 1951, the state of Florida spent over $70,000 sending Black students out of state. If we put $70,000 in 1951 and $2025, that is a large six-figure sum. That is
I
nearly
got you.
$1 million. And that was in one academic year. So when we think about the fact that these Southern states operated segregation scholarship programs, sometimes for 3 decades, those are large sums of money that were stolen from public Black colleges. And Southern states didn't have to do this. They could have desegregated their flagship institutions, or they could have invested in their public Black colleges. So that's why I say that there's this debt owed, because all of this money that is being taken out of Black colleges from the late 1920s until the 1960s, or here in Georgia until 1971, that's a large debt. And if we're going to talk about the state that many of these public Black colleges are in today and the
Right. I got
financial crisis that they find themselves in, we've got to understand how they got there. And they didn't get there because of poor governance. They got there because the Southern state governments have underfunded these institutions for decades. And so when we look at a case like Tennessee State,
you. Yeah, I was going to use that one. Yeah, that's right.
in 2023, the Biden administration said that the state of Tennessee owed Tennessee State $2.1 billion from the years 1987 until 2020. $2.1 billion for that 30-year period. When I read the newspaper article, I said, well, why'd they start in 1987? Because Tennessee started their segregation scholarship program in 1937. And they said for every dollar we spend to help an African American resident of Tennessee get a graduate degree, we're going to take that money out of Tennessee State's budget. So my calculations, not including interest, show that the state of Tennessee owes Tennessee State at least $8 billion. Now, if we include interest, that number is
Yeah,
significantly higher. I'm dealing in raw numbers. I'm just
yeah, I
dealing in
got
what is
you.
owed. That would be $8 billion. If Tennessee State had the $8 billion that the state of Tennessee owes it, Tennessee State would not be in a financial crisis today.
That's right.
Tennessee State would have the resources to build new buildings, to hire more faculty, to maintain infrastructure, and to start new programs.
That's
So when
right.
we see the crisis going on at Tennessee State, don't say that this is because of poor governance, that the president didn't manage resources well, because that's not the case at all.
Yeah, I
The
got you.
real reason that the institution is struggling today is because Tennessee has this long history of underfunding that institution. It never funded Tennessee State at the level that it funded UT Knoxville, the white flagship. And not only was it never funded at the same level, but they were literally stealing money out of the institution's operating budget to preserve segregation. And that is the case for 16 southern and border states. And so that's the argument that I'm making in the book, that we have to take this long view of what southern states have done to African Americans in terms of trying to deny them equal educational opportunities. And when we look at that denial at the graduate and professional school level, there's a debt that's owed to public Black colleges.
Just two more questions. Now, some of it is they didn't want them to go to the school. Do you think there was a backstory they thought even greater than that? If we send them away to another school, they won't come back?
Exactly.
Oh,
Exactly. You hit
really?
the nail on the head. We know
Really?
that throughout history, um, white supremacists have not liked educated Black people. They called them uppity. They don't know their place. They're going to create all kinds of problems and discontent in Black communities. So I really do believe that many of these Southern lawmakers, when they created their segregation scholarship programs, they were hoping that Black people were going to go north and never come home. But this is not a brain drain narrative. 90% of the segregation scholarship recipients come back to the South.
Is
They
that
get
right?
their law degrees, they get their medical degrees. These are public school teachers who are going out to get master's degrees, and they come home and they use their training and their credentials to try to improve life for other African Americans. So the joke was on these white supremacists. They were not going to easily get rid of Black people as perhaps they had hoped.
Have you written other books?
I have. So before this book, I wrote a book on the history of Head Start and looking at the ways in which Black women, working class Black women, were central into making Head Start a very successful early childhood program for Black children in particular. And that's the title of that book is A Chance for Change, Head
Okay.
Start and Mississippi's Black Freedom Struggle, because I focused on the state of Mississippi because Head Start starts in 1965. That was the first year of Head Start nationally. And when we think about Mississippi and its history in the civil rights era, people typically focus on 1964, Freedom Summer, right? They focus on the effort to help African Americans in Mississippi register to vote. They focus on the challenge that African Americans in Mississippi make to the Democratic Party at that 1964 Democratic National Convention. And with the book, I started with a simple question. What did Black people in Mississippi do after 1964? What did Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer do after 1964, right? After she gives that compelling speech and the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party still is not seated. What happened? And when I look at Mississippi 1965 onward, many of the Black Mississippians who had been key players in the civil rights movement turned to the war on poverty, and they turned to Head Start in particular. Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer and her husband, Mr. Pap Hamer, would be two of the key players in Head Start in Mississippi. Why? Because they had already been fired. They couldn't get a job. Everyone knew their names. But Head Start being a federal program, they're able to get jobs in this Head Start program that's going to pay them not just a living wage and a wage that's higher than they've ever made before, but they then become independent of the local white power structure. They're no longer employed by Mr. Charlie or Miss Ann.
I
And so they're
got you.
able to continue their organizing and not worry about economic reprisals. And so that's what that book is about. But it's looking at the women who are working in the Head Start program, but also looking at what they're teaching Black children. So this Head Start program was a radical program. They're not just learning their shapes and numbers. They are learning um, how to critique white supremacy. There's one song that they're teaching 4-year-olds, a nappy-headed N is not my name. That's literally the lyrics to the song that they were teaching 4-year-olds
Really?
in 1965. And they said, we're not just going to be celebrating George Washington's birthday and Abraham Lincoln's birthday. We're going to be celebrating the anniversary of Nat Turner's rebellion. That's going to be a holiday in our Head Start Center.
Oh, I love
We're gonna
it.
we're gonna have a holiday commemorating Medgar Evers' birthday since he had been gunned down in his driveway in 1963. So this was a Head Start program that showed how even preschool education could be used to support an ongoing civil rights struggle.
You live in your dream, aren't you? You found your mission, and you're happy with what that it's all came full circle for you. That's a question.
Sure. I mean, I definitely believe I'm living my dream. I feel very blessed to be paid to read, teach, and write about the experiences of Black people, how we have overcome, how we have found joy, how we have found a resolve to keep going in spite of odds that would, put even the strongest person down. And so
Yeah.
this is really I can't even call it a labor of love. It is a privilege. It is a privilege to get to do this every day. And more importantly, now than ever, that we continue to lift up Black history, that we continue to ensure that the narrative of the contributions of African descended people to the United States and to the world are not forgotten, that we don't allow the history of this nation to be rewritten in a way that does not bear witness to all of the ways in which our citizenship has been challenged and our citizenship has been denied. Because if we don't tell these stories, we could very well find ourselves having to fight the same battles over again.
I
So I
got two
consider
more.
it a
I
privilege.
know you got to go. I got two more. How does somebody get an A in your class?
Oh, my students will tell you they're going to have to do well in my courses. They're going to have to read. They're going to have to come to class prepared to have substantive conversation about the readings that have been assigned. And they're
Okay.
going to have to do their work well. So I expect excellence in their written, any written work that's submitted. So it's not hard to do well in my course, but you must be committed to doing the work. And I
Okay.
thankfully I do have students who are committed to doing the work. I
Okay.
tell them on the first day of class, we're going to have fun. You're going to learn a lot, but you're going to work hard. And if
Okay.
you are not interested in working hard, you might want to drop the course now.
Okay.
And typically students don't drop.
Yeah.
And we end up having, a great time learning together
Yeah.
and figuring out how what I'm teaching them is oftentimes in conflict to what they have learned before, or how
Yes.
what I am teaching them is a huge addition to what they have previously learned because there have been so many omissions
All
in
right.
the history courses that
I
they've
got two
taken.
more. I'm sorry. I know you got to go. Okay. Have you ever had a white student come up to you and say, "Thank you for what you've done. You've opened my eyes"?
I have. I have had white, Black, Asian, Native American students who've all come up to me and said, I have never heard of this before, and I
Yeah,
consider
I hadn't
myself to
either.
be a
I
history
had
buff.
not either.
And so I always take that, I'm always happy. I'm always saying, well, I hope that has inspired you to want to learn more, to continue
Yes.
to dig, to continue to interrogate, to continue to question what you're reading, what you're learning, because it's all a choice. Even in
Yes.
my own courses, for everything that I am teaching, there's perhaps something that I've had to leave out for the lack of time,
Yeah, I
right?
got
And
you. I
so
got you.
I tell my students they should not expect their instructors to be able to give them a complete story. I'm introducing them to a conversation that they're
Yes.
then a part of, and they will
Yes.
continue that conversation long after they leave my course.
Okay, one more thing. Show the book again. How do people get the book? How do people follow you? Tell us that as you may want to see fit.
Sure. So my most recent book again is A Forgotten Migration, Black Southerners, Segregation Scholarships, and the Dead Ode to Public HBCUs. You can purchase this book wherever you like purchasing books. It was published by the University of North Carolina Press. So you could go to uncpress.org and purchase the book on that website. Of course, it is on Amazon. It's sold at Barnes and Noble. You can request it from your favorite independent bookseller anywhere in the country. They would be able to help you secure your copy. I am still on Twitter. My handle is Prof C Sanders. You can find me on Twitter. I'm oftentimes, writing op-eds to maybe, CNN or Time Magazine. So you can find my writings online. Typically, if I'm typically writing about Black educational studies in some capacity. But I'm always looking forward to engaging with anyone who's interested in African American history or Black educational history in particular. My website is crystalrsanders.com. There you'll find on the events page where I'm speaking, if I'm giving a public lecture somewhere around the country, you'll be able to follow my itinerary in case I'm coming to a city near you.
There you go. I love it. And hey, everybody, I told you you're gonna like this. You want to love it, everybody, but there is no love button. Hit the like button on this one. She was good. Hit the subscribe button, so you can, let me know you like me. And then tell somebody about Strong Inspiration. Don't keep it to yourself. This is what we do. And I'm so fortunate that she came on because they vet me. They wonder who is this guy, and then they see some of the other content. And this is the way I do it. I do my best to ask intelligent questions. And so go to my website, everybody, businessintheblack.net. How about this? And lastly, and I mean this, so sister, sincerely, I want you to stay strong, stay safe, stay on your grind. I love what you've done, how you became your parents and your grandparents and the history that they taught you, and your sister and everybody else that you influenced as a result of that. And that you have followed through on this dream and you're living it to the highest heights. You got that doctorate, and I'm sure that when you wrote the paper, they didn't even read it. Said, "Come on over here and then do the work." And you're doing it eloquently, excellently, greatly. Thank you for that. And go to her website, everybody. Follow, get that book. The book is good. Bestseller type thing and all that kind of stuff. Do that. And she got people too already. So do that and then have her come speak and tell these stories that she only touched upon here in the time on Strong Inspiration. So with that, I'll say bye-bye. We out.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.